a connection beyond words. The Meadowbrook Annual Fair buzzed with life, a vibrant mosaic of laughter, music, and the scent of autumn treats. Families wandered between booths as children clutched sticky cotton candy and carousel horses spun in joyous circles. Yet, amidst the cheerful chaos, 12-year-old Nathan stood apart, his small frame trembling as the world around him grew too loud, too overwhelming. Nathan's hands clamped tightly over his ears, his body rocking back and forth as the storm of noise bore down on him. Emily, his mother, knelt in front of him, her voice calm yet trembling. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe," she whispered, even as panic gripped her. Curious glances from passers-by stung like needles, but Emily focused solely on her son. Just as she reached out to comfort him, a sudden stillness fell over the fairgrounds. From the nearby livestock pen, a chestnut horse lifted his head. His sleek coat shimmered in the golden sunlight, and his dark eyes locked onto Nathan with an unspoken understanding. The horse moved, stepping deliberately out of his pen despite the protests of his owner, Grace Callahan. A seasoned rancher, Grace watched in stunned silence as her horse, Apollo, ignored her commands and strode toward the distressed boy. Emily barely noticed Apollo's approach until the horse stood before them, his massive frame towering but gentle. Slowly, Apollo lowered his head and pressed his broad forehead against Nathan's shoulder. Nathan froze. His rocking stopped. His hands, once clamped over his ears, fell to his sides as if the chaos around him had dissolved into stillness. Nathan turned, his tear-filled eyes meeting Apollo's. Hesitant fingers reached out, brushing against the horse's velvety muzzle. Apollo didn't flinch. He simply stood, radiating a calm that enveloped both boy and mother. A small smile crept across Nathan's face, a smile Emily hadn't seen in weeks. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Nathan, are you okay?" But her son didn't answer. Instead, he leaned into Apollo, his hands stroking the horse's broad neck. For the first time in what felt like forever, Nathan seemed at peace. Grace approached cautiously, her boots crunching against the gravel. "I've never seen him do this before," she murmured, her gaze fixed on Apollo. "He's calm, sure, but this is something else." Emily wiped her eyes, her voice quivering with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you or him." Apollo snorted softly, his ears flicking toward Nathan before stepping back as if to say goodbye. Yet, the lingering way he gazed at Nathan struck Emily deeply. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was something more. A new beginning. The days following the fair felt different. Typically, overwhelming experiences like this would leave Nathan retreating into silence for days. But this time, things changed. "Apollo," Nathan murmured one morning, tracing shapes in the air with his fingers. "Big, kind." The words were few, but for Emily they were treasures. Nathan couldn't stop talking about the horse. The connection between them had lit a spark in her son, a light she hadn't seen in years. She couldn't ignore it. The number Grace had handed her at the fair sat tucked in her purse. With a mixture of nerves and determination, Emily dialed. Grace answered warmly, though surprised. A visit was arranged for later that week. As Emily and Nathan pulled into Grace's farm, the sight before them was breathtaking. Rolling hills cradled the property, and golden sunlight painted the paddocks in hues of amber and green. Nathan's small hand gripped Emily's tightly, his gaze fixed on Apollo grazing in the distance. Grace greeted them with a wide, welcoming smile. "Apollo's just over there," she said, gesturing to the field. Nathan hesitated, his grip tightening on Emily's hand. Grace knelt to his level, her voice gentle. "It's okay, Nathan. Apollo remembers you." Nathan looked at her, then back at Apollo. With a deep breath, he released his mother's hand and took a small step forward. Apollo lifted his head, his ears twitching as if sensing Nathan's approach. With deliberate steps, the horse met the boy halfway. Nathan reached out, brushing Apollo's sleek coat with trembling fingers. "Hi," Nathan whispered, his voice barely audible. Apollo dipped his head, emitting a soft snort that made Nathan giggle, a sound so rare it brought tears to Emily's eyes. A bond deepens. What started as a single visit became a ritual. Every week, Emily brought Nathan to Grace's farm. Slowly but surely, Nathan's confidence grew. He began helping Grace with small tasks, brushing Apollo's mane, filling his water trough, and even leading him through the paddock. One crisp afternoon, as Nathan ran his fingers through Apollo's mane, Grace leaned against the barn door and began to share a story. Not many people know this, she began, her voice tinged with emotion. But Apollo wasn't always this calm. When I rescued him 5 years ago, he was in bad shape, thin, scared, and completely untrusting. It took months just to get him to let me touch him. Emily looked up, surprised. I can't imagine him like that. Grace nodded. Neither can I anymore. But even back then, he had this sensitivity. Once he started to trust me, I noticed he had a way of calming the other horses, especially the nervous or injured ones. It's like he knows exactly what they need. Her words lingered in Emily's mind as they drove home. That night, as Nathan slept soundly, Emily stared at the ceiling, reflecting on the parallels between her son and the horse. Both had faced struggles, both had been misunderstood, and both, it seemed, had found a kindred spirit in the other. The healing circle. Nathan's visits to Grace's farm became the highlight of his week. Apollo's calming presence transformed the boy in ways Emily could hardly believe. His words grew more frequent, his laughter more spontaneous, and his once hesitant movements became confident strides as he guided Apollo through the paddocks. One sunny afternoon, Nathan brushed Apollo's coat with care, his small hands moving in steady strokes. Grace leaned against the barn door, watching with quiet pride. Emily stood nearby, unable to hide her amazement. "You've created something special here," Emily said to Grace. Grace smiled, but hesitated. "It's not just me," she replied. "Apollo's the one with the gift. He seems to know exactly what these kids need." A thought had been growing in Emily's mind for weeks, and she finally voiced it. What if other kids could experience this? What if the farm became more than just a place for us? Grace looked thoughtful, but wary. "It's a beautiful idea," she admitted, "but it's a lot to take on. Apollo's unique, but he's sensitive. I'd be worried about overwhelming him." Emily nodded. "Maybe just 1 or 2 families to start. We could see how it goes." Reluctantly, Grace agreed. Over the next few weeks, Emily reached out to other parents whose children might benefit from Apollo's unique touch. Soon 2 families visited the farm. The results were remarkable. One boy, James, struggled with motor skills and found holding a grooming brush almost impossible. But Apollo stood perfectly still, his quiet patience encouraging James to keep trying. After several attempts, James managed a steady stroke, his face lighting up with pride. Another child, Ella, clung to her mother in fear of the large horse. Apollo, sensing her apprehension, knelt slightly, lowering his head to her level. Slowly, Ella reached out and touched his mane. By the end of the session, she was walking alongside him, giggling softly, her mother wiping away tears of joy. These moments filled Emily with hope. Nathan, too, seemed to thrive in this new environment. He eagerly helped other children during their visits, showing them how to groom Apollo or guiding them through simple exercises. For the first time in years, Emily saw her son as a leader, his quiet confidence inspiring others. Shadows loom one evening. As Emily helped Grace clean the barn, she noticed a stack of papers on a desk. Among them was a letter stamped with bold red letters, "Final Notice." Emily's heart sank. "Grace?" she asked cautiously, holding up the paper. "What's this?" Grace sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's nothing," she muttered, avoiding Emily's gaze. "Just overdue taxes on the farm." Emily frowned. "How overdue?" Grace hesitated before answering. "Far enough. If I don't pay soon, the bank could foreclose." Emily's chest tightened. The farm had become more than just a sanctuary for Nathan. It was a haven for families in need, a place of healing and connection. Losing it was unthinkable. "We'll figure something out," Emily said, her voice filled with determination. But as she lay awake that night, fear gnawed at her. What if they couldn't save the farm? What if the fragile hope they'd found slipped away? The community rallies. The next morning, Emily and Grace sat at the kitchen table, papers spread before them as they brainstormed fundraising ideas. They considered bake sales, charity rides, and auctions, but the numbers refused to add up. Grace's exhaustion was evident. "I don't know, Emily," she admitted, her voice heavy with defeat. "Even with the donations we've started receiving, it's just not enough." Emily shook her head, refusing to accept failure. "We're not giving up. This farm means too much to too many people." As if to underscore her point, Nathan's soft voice floated through the open window. He was leading Apollo around the paddock, his calm commands demonstrating a bond that had grown unshakable. Emily watched her son, her heart swelling with pride and determination. She couldn't let this slip away. Later that day, a sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway. A man in a tailored coat stepped out, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel as he approached the porch. "Good afternoon," he said smoothly, extending a business card. "I represent a corporation interested in acquiring valuable assets. We've heard about your remarkable horse, Apollo." Grace's eyes narrowed. "He's not for sale," she said firmly. The man raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I understand your hesitation, but we believe Apollo could be the centerpiece of a highly lucrative equestrian show. We're prepared to offer a sum that could cover your debts and more." Grace's fists clenched at her sides. "Apollo isn't just a horse," she replied. "He's part of this farm and this community. He's not going anywhere." The man's polished smile faltered slightly. He handed Grace his card. "Think it over. My offer stands." With that, he turned and left, leaving a cloud of unease in his wake. A day for Apollo. Emily wasted no time. She knew the answer wasn't to sell Apollo, but to rally the community. Together, she and Grace organized a massive event, Apollo's Day. The festival would feature riding demonstrations, therapy sessions, a silent auction, and a concert by local musicians. The event arrived with a flurry of excitement. Families from across Meadowbrook and beyond poured onto the farm. Tents dotted the fields, and the barn transformed into an auction house featuring handmade quilts, local artwork, and more. The highlight of the day was a live demonstration led by Nathan. With Apollo at his side, the boy guided the horse through a series of carefully practiced steps. The crowd watched in awe as Nathan gave quiet commands and Apollo responded flawlessly. The final move, a graceful bow, brought the audience to its feet in thunderous applause. Nathan leaned close to Apollo, stroking his mane. "We did it," he whispered, his voice brimming with pride. But just as the day seemed a resounding success, the black sedan returned. The corporate representative stepped out, his expression carefully neutral. "I see your community loves Apollo," he began smoothly, "but love doesn't pay bills. My company is prepared to double our original offer." The crowd murmured in shock. Emily's blood boiled. "He's not for sale," she snapped. Grace hesitated, the weight of the man's words pressing down on her. The money could save the farm. But as she looked toward the paddock where Nathan stood with Apollo, her resolve hardened. "No," she said firmly. "Apollo isn't just a horse. He's a healer, a friend, and part of this family. We'll find another way." The man's smile disappeared, replaced by frustration. Without another word, he left, his car kicking up dust as it sped away. Hope restored. As the sun set on Apollo's Day, families lingered, sharing stories of how the horse had touched their lives. Grace stood in the barn, tallying donations. Despite the incredible turnout, the total still fell short of what was needed. She tried to mask her disappointment, but Emily saw through her brave face. "We'll figure it out," Emily said, her voice steady despite the worry gnawing at her. Just as Grace began to respond, a calm but confident voice interrupted. "Miss Callahan?" They turned to see a woman stepping forward. She was poised and professional, wearing a tailored jacket and carrying a leather portfolio. "I'm Dr. Ellen Harper," she introduced herself. "I run a nonprofit specializing in equine therapy. I was moved by what I saw today. Apollo is extraordinary, and so is what you've built here." Grace blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you. That means a lot." Dr. Harper smiled warmly. "I'd like to partner with you. We can help you pay off the farm, provide staff and resources, and expand your programs. Apollo could be the centerpiece of a therapeutic center that helps countless families." Grace's knees nearly buckled as relief washed over her. "You're serious?" she whispered. "Completely," Dr. Harper replied. "What you have here is too special to lose." Emily placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. "This is it," she said softly. "This is how we save the farm." A new beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Grace and Emily worked closely with Dr. Harper to formalize the partnership. Grants were secured, staff hired, and plans drafted to expand the farm's facilities. The looming foreclosure notice was finally withdrawn, lifting a heavy weight from Grace's shoulders. Nathan, unaware of the financial crisis that had nearly claimed the farm, continued to visit Apollo regularly. His bond with the horse only deepened as he grew more confident in himself. Emily marveled at the transformation in her son. The shy, withdrawn boy she had once worried over was now a leader, helping other children connect with Apollo. The first official group therapy session under the new partnership took place on a warm spring morning. Families arrived from all over the region, some driving hours for the chance to meet Apollo. Nathan stood beside Emily, nervously adjusting the brim of his cap. "You'll be great," Emily said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Just show them what Apollo showed you." Nathan nodded, taking a deep breath. With quiet confidence, he stepped into the paddock where Apollo waited patiently. The children gathered cautiously, their parents watching from the sidelines. One little girl, Mia, clung to her mother, her small body trembling. She had been nonverbal since a traumatic event a year earlier, and her mother had little hope she would engage with the horse. Nathan noticed Mia's fear and approached her gently. "It's okay," he said softly. "Apollo is kind." Hesitantly, Mia took a small step forward, her hand gripping Nathan's tightly. Together they approached Apollo. The horse, sensing her apprehension, lowered his head to her level. Mia reached out with trembling fingers and brushed Apollo's velvety nose. A small giggle escaped her lips, a sound her mother hadn't heard in over a year. The crowd gasped, and tears streamed down Mia's mother's face as she whispered, "Thank you." Nathan smiled, his confidence growing. "See," he said to Mia, "he's your friend now." A legacy of love. That evening, as the last of the families left, Grace gathered everyone in the barn. Her voice trembled with emotion as she addressed the small group. "Today wasn't just about saving the farm," she said. "It was about giving it a purpose, and that's because of all of you, especially you, Nathan." Nathan, who had been brushing Apollo's mane, looked up in surprise. Grace crouched beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've shown us something incredible," she said. "Apollo has a gift, but so do you. You're the bridge between him and these kids." The room erupted into applause, but Nathan's focus remained on Apollo. He leaned close to the horse and whispered something only Apollo could hear. The horse nickered softly as if in response. Under the partnership with Dr. Harper's nonprofit, Meadowbrook Farm transformed into a thriving therapeutic center. Families traveled from across the region to participate in its programs, and Apollo became the heart of it all. His name became synonymous with hope, his presence a source of healing for children and their families. Nathan, now a regular helper at the farm, became known as Apollo's Whisperer. His story inspired countless parents, many of whom saw glimpses of hope in their own children's transformations. Emily watched her son with pride and gratitude, knowing they had found something extraordinary. A bright future. Months later, the farm hosted a special event to celebrate its success. Families who had benefited from the programs returned to share stories of progress and gratitude. Nathan led a demonstration with Apollo, guiding the horse through a series of steps that ended with a graceful bow. The crowd erupted into applause, but Nathan's focus remained on Apollo, his hand resting on the horse's strong neck. As the event wound down, Grace stood beside Emily, watching Nathan and Apollo in the fading light. "I used to think I saved Apollo," Grace said quietly. "But I think he saved all of us." Emily nodded, her heart full. "It's like they found each other when they needed it most." Apollo nickered softly, his ears flicking toward the two women as if he understood. Nathan turned, his face glowing with joy. In that moment, Emily realized how far they had come, not just Nathan, but all of them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the farm in a golden glow, Nathan leaned against Apollo, his voice carrying softly on the breeze. "Good job, Apollo," he said. "We're a team." And as Grace and Emily watched the boy and his horse, they knew this was only the beginning.